The cold, blue light of my smartphone screen was an unforgiving thing as it illuminated the dark corners of my quiet apartment. For 2 long, grueling years, I had envisioned this exact morning as the moment of my ultimate triumph, a clean break from the exhausting cycle of survival that had defined my entire 20s. Instead, the soft glare of the screen revealed a reality so grotesque that the breath caught in my throat before I could even pin my graduation tassel into place. Beneath the automated congratulatory notifications from my university lay a silent, catastrophic alert from my identity monitoring service, time-stamped at exactly 4:35 in the morning. Someone had attempted to fraudulently open a $60,000 luxury line of credit using my clean social security number, my banking profile, and my newly minted accounting credentials. The digital footprint left behind by the high-stakes application didn't point to a faceless cybercriminal operating from a hidden server overseas. It led directly to the static IP address of the router in my parents' suburban home. My older sister, Kelly, had quietly copied my private professional files while I was packing my things, attempting to secure an elite lifestyle on the back of the degree I had nearly destroyed my health to achieve. I didn't scream, and I didn't reach for the phone to unleash a wave of useless emotion, because my years of intensive training in forensic accounting had taught me that panic is the ultimate enemy of strategy. With slow, calculated keystrokes, I immediately locked down the fraudulent application, flagged the attempt as an official instance of identity theft, and frozen my entire credit profile behind an unbreakable wall of security protocols. As I closed my laptop and adjusted the heavy satin of my master's graduation gown, I felt a dangerous, icy clarity settle deep into my bones, completely replacing the exhaustion that had plagued me for a decade. To understand the sheer magnitude of this early morning betrayal, you have to understand the brutal, unforgiving road I had to walk just to stand on that graduation stage. While my peers spent their college years enjoying campus life, weekend parties, and long summers of leisure, my existence was a punishing, relentless blur of double shifts and sleepless nights. I worked 40 hours a week as a nighttime auditor for a local logistics firm, scrubbing endless columns of corporate financial data until my eyes burned under the harsh fluorescent lights of an empty warehouse office. The moment my graveyard shift ended at dawn, I would change my clothes in a cramped car seat and rush to the university library, working as a senior teaching assistant just to cover the remaining cost of my tuition. I became intimately familiar with the feeling of sitting in advanced seminars completely foggy from a total lack of sleep, surviving on bitter, gas station coffee and instant noodles while my head throbbed with tension. My fingers were perpetually calloused from typing out complex tax case studies, and I had cried over messy spreadsheets in the dead of night more times than my pride would ever care to admit. In stark, agonizing contrast to my grueling routine, my family lived a comfortably parasitic lifestyle, treating my relentless work ethic as a communal, bottomless financial safety net. My parents, Lisa and Dawn, had long since abandoned any real professional ambition, choosing instead to live off high-interest personal loans and the steady stream of emergency cash they routinely guilt me into providing. They viewed me not as a daughter to be protected and cherished, but as a walking credit score, a convenient tool to shield them from the harsh consequences of their own profound laziness. Kelly was the absolute worst of them all, floating through life with an unearned sense of luxury, driving an expensive car she couldn't afford, and passing her toxic habits down to her 14-year-old son, Tyler. Whenever Kelly couldn't pay her rent, or whenever my parents faced a utility shut-off notice, they would gather around the kitchen table, using tears and emotional manipulation to break my boundaries. They would look at me with practiced, watery desperation and say, "Rachel, you're the strong one, you have to save the family. It's just a simple piece of paperwork that won't affect your future." Because I loved them, and because I was terrified of being labeled as the selfish, ungrateful daughter, I had signed my name away on their car financing, their department store cards, and their consolidation debts. On paper, my hard-earned financial identity was drowning in a sea of liabilities that weren't mine. In reality, I was building a silent, towering resentment that I never dared to voice to a single soul. They openly mocked my academic ambition, calling me a boring, tight-fisted nerd who didn't understand how to enjoy life, even as they used my pristine name to keep their artificially funded lives afloat. The university commencement ceremony passed by in a distant, hollow haze of speeches and applause, a massive milestone that was completely stripped of its joy by the burning knowledge of the morning's discovery. After the final caps were thrown into the air, we transitioned to a mid-range Italian restaurant near campus, where I had reserved a long table to celebrate with my friends and closest professors. The atmosphere inside the private dining room was immediately heavy, thick with a social friction that made the tiny hairs on the back of my neck stand up. My university friends and academic mentors sat on one end of the table, offering genuine smiles, warm handshakes, and intelligent conversation about the bright corporate futures ahead of us. My parasitic family sat on the opposite end, immediately souring the celebratory mood by complaining loudly about the price of the parking valet and the upscale nature of the menu selections. Kelly sat back in her padded chair, her eyes narrow and venomous as she stared at me through the candle flames, her jaw tightly clenched in a silent, seething fury. She knew that her $60,000 luxury line of credit had been blocked at the final verification stage, and though she didn't know how I had intercepted it, she could feel her financial control slipping away. The sharp sensory details of that room became permanently etched into my memory: the rich scent of garlic and charred bread, the low clinking of heavy wine glasses, and the quiet, malicious whispering of my sister. When the main courses were cleared away, the waitstaff dimmed the restaurant lights and proudly brought out a massive, beautiful tiered cake that my university colleagues had secretly surprised me with. The white frosting gleamed under the soft candlelight, decorated with a miniature fondant graduation cap and meticulous blue lettering that read, "Congratulations to Rachel, Master of Accounting." For a single, fleeting second, the genuine warmth of the room washed over me, and I leaned forward to blow out the single candle flickering on top of the smooth frosting. Before my lips could even part to exhale, Kelly leaned over to her son Tyler, her lips moving rapidly as she whispered a stream of toxic, targeted poison directly into his ear. Tyler's face twisted into a cruel, knowing smirk, his teenage eyes locking onto mine with an aggressive defiance that had been carefully nurtured by his mother's absolute lack of accountability. He stood up from his chair so fast that the metal legs scraped violently against the terracotta tile floor, instantly shattering the joyful harmony of the entire restaurant. With a swift, calculated movement that showed no hesitation, Tyler reached across the table, grabbed the heavy ceramic cake plate with both hands, and flipped the entire centerpiece directly onto the floor. The cake hit the ground with a wet, heavy thud, sending white frosting, blue lettering, and broken sponge crumbs exploding across the dirty tiles and directly onto my polished leather shoes. The restaurant fell into a suffocating, dead silence as my university friends gasped in pure horror, their cameras freezing midair in absolute disbelief at what they had just witnessed. Tyler looked down at the absolute ruin of my celebration, let out a loud, mocking laugh, and shouted across the quiet room, "There, eat it off the ground, Aunt Rachel." The devastating emotional weight of the moment didn't come from the ruined cake, it came from the sudden, booming laughter that immediately erupted from my family's side of the table. Kelly laughed the loudest, slapping the mahogany table with her open palm and wiping mock tears from her eyes as she yelled, "Oh my God, he gets his wicked sense of humor completely from me." My mother let out a sharp, nervous giggle, shaking her head dismissively, while my father chucklerly muttered, "This kid is an absolute legend. Don't make a scene over a joke, Rachel." Two of my closest friends stood up from their chairs, their faces red with a righteous fury as they prepared to loudly defend me against the unspeakable cruelty of my own blood. I placed a trembling, frozen hand on their arms, holding them back with a heavy, stunned silence that echoed louder than any hysterical scream could have in that moment. I knelt down on the dirty restaurant floor, my hands shaking with a mixture of grief and rage as I began to help the mortified waiter scrape the remains of my hard work into a plastic trash bag. My family didn't offer a single word of apology, nor did they offer to pay the restaurant for the massive mess. Instead, Kelly rolled her eyes and loudly announced that I was completely ruining the night by being too sensitive. The drive back to my apartment was executed in a brutal, thoughtless silence, with my parents talking about the local weather as if they hadn't just watched my dignity be torn apart. The moment I stepped through my front door, I threw the plastic bag containing the smashed cake into the trash, stood alone in my living room, and finally allowed myself to weep. I wept for the years of silent exploitation, the stolen nights of sleep, and the terrifying realization that to the people who raised me, I was nothing more than an ATM with a heartbeat. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed in the darkness with a long, multi-paragraph text message from my mother sent directly to the family group chat. The text was a masterpiece of narcissistic inversion, stating that after talking it over, the family had decided to completely sever all contact with me because I was negative, ungrateful, and had embarrassed them with my elitist attitude. A few seconds later, a little thumbs-up icon popped up directly beneath the text message. Kelly had liked the digital banishment, sealing the contract of my formal exclusion from the family. That tiny digital interaction became the ultimate catalyst, breaking the final chains of guilt that had kept me bound to their financial destruction for my entire adult life. With a cold, steady hand, I typed a single, unyielding sentence into the group chat before blocking every single one of their numbers permanently, removing my name from every loan tomorrow. By midnight, my phone screen lit up continuously like an emergency siren, displaying over 100 missed calls and frantic voicemails that all carried the exact same flavor of absolute panic. The next morning, I woke up at dawn, brewed a cup of black coffee, and pulled out the thick, heavy folder where I kept all the co-signed financial documents I had accumulated. I scheduled an emergency meeting at the credit union, walking into the branch manager's office with the cold precision of a surgeon preparing to amputate a diseased limb from a patient. Utilizing the full extent of my forensic accounting expertise, I systematically began the high-stakes process of financial decoupling, cutting the strings they used to control me. I removed my identity from the primary joint checking account, transferring my personal savings into a secure, private corporate entity that my family could never track or access. I shut down the high-limit department store credit cards that my mother had been using for her personal shopping sprees, using the signing bonus from my new job to pay off the remaining balances in full. When it came to the larger, predatory loans, specifically the high-interest financing on Kelly's luxury car and my parents' consolidation loan, the bank officer informed me that I couldn't simply remove my name. Co-signing is an ironclad legal contract, Rachel, he said gently, looking at the dense paperwork. Unless they refinance the debt under their own names, you are legally tied to these balances. I looked him dead in the eye and replied, "Then note my file that I am explicitly refusing to make any future voluntary payments and route all default alerts directly to my personal secure email. I am stepping away from the steering wheel, and if they refuse to pay, let the accounts default and let the collection agencies show them what the real world looks like." The domino effect of that afternoon's choices rippled through my family's lives over the next 2 years with the devastating, unstoppable force of a natural disaster. Without my income quietly covering their late fees and subsidizing their profound laziness, their artificially funded lifestyle collapsed within a matter of months. Kelly's luxury vehicle was publicly repossessed from her driveway in broad daylight, the heavy chains of the tow truck rattling loudly as the neighbors watched her scream from the front porch. Constant, aggressive calls from collection agencies began hounding my parents' phones at all hours of the day, demanding money that they simply did not possess. They were forced to downsize from their comfortable suburban rental home, moving into a cramped, run-down 2-bedroom apartment on the industrial edge of the city. For the first time in their entire lives, true financial accountability slammed into them, forcing my aging parents to take low-wage warehouse shifts just to afford basic groceries. I watched this collapse from a safe distance, remaining completely silent as I relocated to Chicago, building a highly successful career at a prestigious corporate accounting firm. About a year into my new life, on a random Tuesday night, my phone buzzed with a long-distance number that I didn't recognize, and out of curiosity, I answered it. Rachel, it was my dad, his voice sounding incredibly small, broken, and completely stripped of the booming, arrogant authority he used to project so effortlessly. We sat in a heavy, echoing silence for a long moment before he finally spoke, his breath catching in his throat as he struggled to find the right words. "I am so deeply sorry, Rachel," he whispered, the raw, unforced apology tearing through the phone line. "I am sorry for what we did to you at that restaurant. Since your mother and I started working these 10-hour shifts on the concrete warehouse floors, my body aches every single day, and I finally understand the hell we put you through. We spent years watching you destroy your health to keep us warm, and instead of protecting you like parents should, we allowed Kelly to treat your clean name like an open vault. We laughed when Tyler threw that cake because we were bitter, Rachel. We were bitter that you were escaping the misery we had created for ourselves, and that is a shame I will take to my grave. I didn't offer him financial rescue, and I didn't tell him that everything was okay, because forgiveness does not require a restoration of access to my life. Thank you for the truth, Dad," I said softly, keeping my voice level and calm. "I hope you and Mom find a way to survive, but I am never coming back to that house." 2 years after that fateful graduation day, I returned to Ohio for a younger cousin's wedding reception, walking into the beautifully lit rustic barn with a quiet, elegant composure. I wore a sophisticated emerald green silk dress, my posture upright, a successful professional who was completely unrecognizable from the exhausted girl covered in white frosting. During the height of the reception, while the rest of the guests were loud on the dance floor, I walked over to the quiet alcove near the untouched dessert table. A shadow fell over the white tablecloth, and I looked up to see a tall, lean teenager standing before me, his eyes fixed firmly on his shoes. It was Tyler, now 16 years old, his demeanor completely transformed from the entitled, malicious child who had flipped my graduation cake out of spite. His clothes were modest, his hair was neatly combed, and the arrogant, mocking smirk had been permanently replaced by a quiet, humbler maturity. "Aunt Rachel," he said softly, his voice trembling slightly as he looked me directly in the eyes. "I needed to look you in the face tonight and apologize for what I did. My mother whispered to me at that table, telling me that you had blocked our money and that I needed to humiliate you to show you who really mattered in this family. I was just a kid, but I knew it was wrong, and I let her use my hands to hurt you because I was terrified of losing her approval and her love. Since we lost the house and the cars, I've had to get a job at a grocery store after school to help pay for our food, and every time my feet ache, I think about how hard you worked for us. You made unimaginable sacrifices to survive that house, and we treated your life like a joke. I promise you that I am trying every day to become a better man than the people who raised me." I looked at my nephew, seeing the genuine remorse etched into his young face, and felt the final, lingering weights of the past dissolve from my chest. "I forgive you, Tyler," I said, placing a gentle, reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Keep working hard, keep choosing the truth, and build a life you can be proud of on your own terms." As I drove back to the airport that night, the cool autumn wind rushing through the open windows of my rental car, a profound peace settled deep into my soul. My family had destroyed their relationship with me in their desperate, greedy attempt to protect a lifestyle of laziness and exploitation. But in doing so, the absolute collapse of their safety net had forced them to face the reality they had spent their entire lives running away from. People always say that home is where your family is, a beautiful, comforting sentiment that you see printed on decorative pillows and sentimental greeting cards. But as I looked out at the open highway, heading back to the beautiful, independent life I had built entirely with my own integrity, I knew a much deeper truth. Home isn't a place defined by a shared last name, a genetic code, or the toxic obligation to endure abuse in the name of loyalty. Home is where your boundaries are honored, where your hard work is genuinely valued, and above all else, home is where you are respected.